would legalize, would essentially bring back sort of Roe era, the abortion standards. And a lot of people support that. The majority of voters support that. But what we have found across the country is when abortion initiatives have been on the ballot, the more progressive abortion rights bills have been passing. But down ballot, the Democrats who actually support those policies have not been getting the same level of support. And the fact of the matter is, if those issues are important to you, you also need representatives in government who are also going to advocate for those issues. So down ballot is important, and it's really, there are lots of websites, there are lots of, you can go to politicians' websites that you trust, you can go to the League of Women Voters, you can go to all kinds of different sources to get, if you spend 5 minutes looking at your local ballot initiatives, you can get all the information you need to make an informed decision and vote in ways that align with your values and what you care about.
The NEA and the AEA also, the National Education Association.
National Education Association
And the
lists.
I think it's the Arizona Education Association. It's for teachers.
Okay, there's another resource. Yes.
What would you say to voters who can't conscience voting for Harris because of her and Biden's stance on the genocide in Palestine?
The question is about Palestine, and there are a lot of voters who are maybe standing on the sidelines or saying that they're not going to participate in this election because Biden has been too staunchly supportive of Israel during this conflict. I would say this, it's a very polarizing issue and it's a very difficult line to walk for politicians. I know that Kamala Harris has been much more outspoken in defense of the citizens of Gaza, and I support that. But I would also say this is one issue of many hundreds that are important and affect not just our lives, but the health of the entire planet. And I can tell you with absolute conviction that if you care about the citizens of Gaza, the candidate who is going to be the worst option for you is Donald Trump. He absolutely doesn't care about the citizens of Gaza. He proved to you that he actually has animus for Muslims. The very first action that he took when he was president was a Muslim ban that was literally the most racist act perpetrated by a U.S. president in the last 100 years. That's not true. We had Japanese internment camps in the 1940s. So it was a runner-up. But that's what I would say. Yes.
I just wanted to say that former Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez is also running for Congress.
That's right.
On the Democratic ticket, so show your support for him too, because he's very grassroots, trying to get support.
Jonathan Nez is also running for office. It's not in this district, but it's an adjacent district, if I'm not mistaken. And that's also a close race. So if you want to do canvassing and supporting, or if you happen to live in that district, pay attention. Yes.
Can I?
Yes.
Hi. If you are in LD3, which is what you're in right now, and you'd like to know the candidates that are supported by LD3, I have them right here. You can come talk to me. The issue at hand is people for school boards and city positions are nonpartisan. They're not allowed to put an R or a D next to their name on the ballot. So if you want to know who you're voting for, please, I'm happy to give you all the information that you need to support the candidates that you want to support. But in order to vote down ballot for Democrats, you've got to know who you're voting for because it doesn't say it on the ballot. Okay? So I'll be over here by the tree, happy to talk to anybody.
Yes.
You have that online event coming up with some other nerd celebrities. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm doing an event on Tuesday called Geeks for Harris. And I love that geek has become an identity group. It's about time. It's funny because I did this like Dudes for Harris event, which was largely, sorry, it wasn't just Dudes for Harris, it was White Dudes for Harris. And I was like, ooh, I'm a little cringy about doing this. In the end, it ended up being a good event, and we addressed the fact that it was white dudes in a way that I thought was I was on board with. But when the Geeks for Harris option came up, it was very cool to notice, like, oh, I have no compunction about that. I feel great about self-identifying as a geek. And yes, we have quite a lineup of cast from the show that most of you earlier indicated you've never heard of, Supernatural. Supernatural is sort of banding together with the Boys cast. And Eric Kripke, who's the creator of both shows, he and I have been working on coordinating this whole thing. We have some surprise cast attendees who don't often speak out on political issues, but are going to be throwing their support behind Harris in this event that we're going to be announcing shortly, which I'm quite excited about. I love that these subcultures are coalescing to support. It's like we have these little fantasy realms that are now impacting reality. It's a strange little world that we live in. But I love that that the geeks and the nerds are wresting power from the corporate machine. So,
And where do we find that?
Geeks, fucking, I don't know. I'm a geek, not a nerd.
Will you put it on your social media?
Yeah, I put it up on my social media, and I will be posting about it more. But if you Google Geeks for Harris, you're gonna find it.
Awesome. Just follow Misha.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, Misha. I gotta get back to work, but can you sign this for me?
Yes.
You know, you're really lucky.
I have to wrap up in about 8 minutes, and then I think we probably can just do a big group photo because unfortunately, I made a terrible mistake, and I had children, which I have to get back to. So I have to fly home. Yes, sir.
Do you think history is repeating itself with the wars in like with Russia and Ukraine, and then because like I heard, if I remember correctly, in the 40s they were like trying to, Republicans or whoever it was were trying not to help out with World War II, and then Pearl Harbor happened.
Isolationism?
Yeah, like do you think like it's kind of repeating in a way, and how do you think we can try to like end it?
Well,
I know it's a big one, but
this is a very big question, and it's very interesting to see how the tides turn with the two parties, and that's a little bit interesting. It's relevant to what I was talking about before. Like, have conversations with your family members and people who don't agree with you about politics, because these aren't fixed identities. Republican and Democrat, they're not fixed identities. Conservative and progressive, they're not fixed identities. There was a time just 20 years ago when the Republican Party was the hawkish, military, foreign interventionist party. There was a time 20 years ago when for sure the Republican Party would have been 100% behind supporting Ukraine in defending their borders against Putin invading. And now the tide has shifted, and suddenly the most conservative Republicans are the ones who are least supportive of Ukraine, and oddly most supportive of the dictator Putin in Russia. So the good news about that is that people and parties are mutable, they're changeable. We can change people's positions on things. The bad news about that is there's an entire wing of one of our major parties who's not standing up to support the autonomy of a free nation's borders, and that's terrifying, because if we start letting dictators run amok around the globe, and unfortunately Trump has literally said he would let Putin do whatever the hell he wants. That's a bad idea for Ukraine. It's a bad idea for all of Europe, because anti-interventionist sentiment in the United States is what kept us out of World War II for too long, and it's what allowed the Nazis to invade so many countries before we got involved. So staying involved is really key. And the great thing about it is we've managed to do that without putting U.S. soldiers in harm's way. We're able to support Ukraine by sending them the resources they need to defend themselves and without putting our sons and daughters in harm's way. And as long as we can keep doing that, I think it's indefensible not to defend Ukraine. Yes.
Hi. I love your comment about how we've been able to support the Ukraine war without sending our own sons and daughters over. However, multiple U.S. representatives have used the statement that this war is a war that is unwinnable against Russia, that our dollars and our foreign weapons coming from Europe are not effective enough in order to win the war in totality. So therefore, isn't it quite selfish to keep supporting a war that our own representatives have deemed as unwinnable and to keep letting Ukrainian sons and daughters die on the battlefield rather than to...
I would say this, because I hear what you're saying, and the idea of somehow facilitating a situation where both sides get ground down and more people die is a terrible outcome. But I will tell you this. I've been to Ukraine a couple of times. I have sat down with President Zelensky and talked to him about what's happening there. And the truth is, if they can appear powerful enough to Russia, if the cost to Russia is too great to continue to take away Ukraine's autonomy, then Russia will negotiate and pull out and cede Ukraine's borders to them. If we pull our support from Ukraine, it is absolutely unequivocal. Putin will take over Ukraine. He will invade the country. He will subjugate the population, and then he will be emboldened to do the same thing in former Soviet republics, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Kazakhstan, and potentially Belarus and Poland and all of these other neighboring nations that have spent most of the last century totally threatened by the threat of the mother bear Russia and the Soviet Union. And so containing that is actually really important, and it's also a matter of principle. If we let powerful nations around the world just invade the borders of other countries and don't do anything about it, then that is license to dictators around the world to start conflicts wherever they feel like they're more powerful than their neighbors. The United States has actually been there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. But the military might of the United States, we have the most powerful military in the world, and I think it's too powerful. But our military is more powerful than the half dozen runner-ups combined. And if we pull our support for weaker countries around the world, then their powerful neighbors will be emboldened to invade.
Just as a follow-up, when you say most powerful military in the world, Representative Young Kim from California has recently stated in her, just on the House floor, that China has about 300 shipyards, more than we do, full of naval fleet capacity that we don't compete with. It's somewhat of like they're producing 300 more times the naval capacity of ships than we have, and Russia has the highest nuclear power.
Well, Russia has the most nuclear warheads in the world, but their nuclear arsenal is actually Soviet-era technology. So while technically there are more warheads, it is significantly less powerful as a military tool than ours. But it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, you're right. China and Russia and the United States all have the power to kill everyone in the world. There are these incredibly powerful armies around the world. But our military might being used to keep the military might of these major aggressors around the world in check is important. I think if we send a signal to Putin like, we're cool, do whatever you want, that will embolden China, it'll embolden Iran, it will embolden North Korea, and that is not something that will actually result in more peace around the world. But I agree with you, ultimately, peace is what we want in Ukraine, and I have spoken to President Zelensky, and peace is what he wants, but he can only get to peace from a place of power, otherwise it's surrender, and surrender means people giving up their culture, their country, their language. I want to say just one more thing about this because I'm going to miss my plane, but I think it's important. Russia is perpetrating a kind of cultural genocide right now. They're abducting Ukrainian children and forcibly removing them to Russia and then raising them in Russian families, not allowing them to speak the Ukrainian language, not allowing them to learn to read and write in Ukrainian, and they're forgetting their own parents. That's a war crime and an atrocity, and something that the rest of the world needs to stand up against, in my opinion. Thank you guys for
Thank you so
doing
much,
this.
Misha.
And
Thank you, Misha.
Thank you, Misha.
and I'm so grateful. Happy birthday, Jeff.